They didn't laugh with you, they laughed at you. And even though the sound of laughter has faded, the taste of it still lingers in your throat. It wasn't just any embarrassment, it lingered. And if you close your eyes now, you might still see the expressions, the knowing glances, the muffled sound of someone who tried to appear discreet, but wasn't. Humiliation is one of the most primal experiences of human existence, and it's not because it hurts. It's because it leaves a mark. Because when the world points the finger, you don't just feel what was said. You feel that all your social value has been erased in front of everyone. And here's the detail few realize. Those who humiliate you don't just want to hurt you. They want to write your story in front of others. They want to define you, limit you, and present this version of you to the audience as if it were the absolute truth. And when everyone accepts this version, you start to wonder, is this who I am now? A stumbling block, a joke? Niccolo Machiavelli saw power as a game of perception. For him, it didn't matter who you really were, but who you appeared to be. And in moments of public humiliation, what's at stake isn't your self-esteem, it's your social identity. It's how the group will see you and treat you from then on. Because no one humiliates someone in secret. Humiliation requires an audience witnesses. It's theater. And in this theater, the goal is simple, to take control of the narrative away from you. They make it seem like it was just a joke, just a comment, just a prank. But behind the feigned lightheartedness lies a real intention. To diminish you in front of everyone, to erase your strength, to reshape your image without your permission. And if you accept this new design, if you swallow hard, if you lower your eyes, you validate the version they created. But what Machiavelli understood, and what few dare practice, is that humiliation can be the fertile ground for a silent and devastating power. Because while most seek to restore their own image through explanation, defense, or confrontation, the Machiavellian observes, he allows the situation to unfold, not out of weakness, but out of calculation, because he knows. It's not the blow that defines the scene, it's the reaction that shapes memory. When someone tries to embarrass you, they're not just talking to you, they're talking to everyone around them. They're performing. They're trying to demonstrate dominance. They're trying to push you out of the social structure where you pose some kind of threat. Because yes, that's what you do. No attack is gratuitous. No public humiliation is innocent, even if it's disguised as a joke. When you sense there's something wrong with that funny phrase, that crooked smile, it's because there is. And the Machiavellian never ignores this instinct. Machiavelli wasn't just a political thinker. He was a psychological strategist. He knew that the most dangerous power isn't what you see, it's what you project. And so he understood that being humiliated isn't the end. It's a transition point, a portal. You can walk through this portal as a victim or as an architect of your own reconstruction. And that choice begins the instant after the attack. It's there when the environment expects you to fall that you must stand, not in revolt, in silence, in calculation, in presence. Because the first truth about humiliation is this: it only works on those who believe they're losing. And the Machiavellian never surrenders that belief. He never shows the blow. He never offers the satisfaction of emotional victory to the other. He transforms the social space around him into a field of observation. And more than that, he transforms the expectation of his defeat into suspense. How many times have you seen someone humiliated and, instead of responding, they just stared? A direct, fixed, impassive stare. A silence that didn't seem paralyzed, but rather deliberate. This moment, which for most would be uncomfortable, for the Machiavellian is creation. It is there that he plants doubt. And where there is doubt, there is imbalance. And where there is imbalance, there is an opening for power. This is the true foundation of psychological mastery. Not giving in to the script, not following the emotional script expected of you, because what everyone expects is the fall, the laughter, the explanation, the apology, the embarrassment. But when instead you maintain your composure, slow down time, reject the logic of the scene, you break the cycle. You instill discomfort in the other. You turn the mirror on the person who tried to be the narrator of your story. And here arises the first conflict. It's difficult, very difficult, because everything inside you screams for you to react, to explain yourself, to counterattack, to redeem yourself. But Machiavelli would never suggest this. He would say, "He who rushes to regain his honor almost always confirms that he has lost it. True honor, according to him, cannot be recovered. It sustains itself, even under attack, even under laughter, even under doubtful eyes. Humiliation is a test, and most fail not because they're weak, but because they've been trained to protect their ego, not their presence. And that's why the Machiavellian is so rare, because he doesn't protect his image. He protects his influence, and those who protect their influence act slowly, coldly, calculatively. Have you ever wondered why certain people seem to emerge unscathed from the worst exposures? Why, even after being ridiculed, they emerge stronger, more feared, more influential? It's not magic. It's structure. It's strategy. They didn't fight for the moment. They built the memory. They knew the moment of humiliation would pass, but what would remain was the way they reacted, or rather, how they didn't react. And this is the next point Machiavelli would emphasize. Don't try to erase what happened. Become greater than the moment. Let the episode exist and grow within the imagination of others as a story in which you haven't vanished, but have endured. This requires courage, and it requires awareness, because you're not just dealing with an attack. You're vying for control of the collective memory, and whoever controls memory controls respect. Humiliation isn't about words, it's about narrative. It's about who shapes the scene and who is shaped by it. And in this silent theater, the Machiavellian doesn't want the last word. He wants the last impact. He doesn't want to be understood. He wants to be felt. He doesn't want to prove himself right. He wants to make it clear that he hasn't been shaken. And now stop for a second and look within. Recall a time when you were humiliated. How did you react? What did you say? What do you wish you had done differently? What part of you was stuck that day? This is the seed of power, the recognition of the wound, the will to no longer bend. Because real power, the power Machiavelli studied, is not born of imposition. It is born of perception. And when you realize you no longer need to react, that you can just be, you begin to become dangerous. Not through aggression, but through stability. And in today's world, where everyone is desperate to respond, to counter, to prove they're right, the presence of someone who remains silent, unafraid, unhurried, is deeply disconcerting, because that person breaks the rhythm, and whoever breaks the rhythm breaks the other person's emotional control. That's how it begins, not with a plan for revenge, but with the silent decision to never again validate the version others try to paint you. To never again mold yourself to fit into a scenario they want to force upon you. To never again allow other people's laughter to overwhelm your presence. You don't have to win the argument. You have to win perception, and that requires more than words. It requires posture. It requires strategy. It requires something no one can teach. But Machiavelli had already pointed out: coolness under pressure, elegance in chaos, emotional command in the midst of judgment. Because in the end, what people remember isn't what was said. It's who seemed unshakable, who remained silent, but said it all with their gaze, who didn't beg for respect, but commanded it, who turned humiliation into a coronation ceremony. And if you think this is just theory, wait until you see how a calculated silence can turn the tide. Because what comes next isn't defense, it's domination. And Machiavelli had already predicted every move. Have you ever noticed how most people react when publicly exposed? When someone makes a cutting joke, a comment disguised as humor but carrying venom, the response is almost always the same: hasty excuses, uncomfortable smiles, attempts to erase what was said with words. It's the natural instinct to regain control. But this instinct, Machiavelli teaches, is the mistake that gives everything to the enemy. The moment of humiliation is not the time to explain yourself. It's the time to observe. Because while you try to fix the image, the other continues painting the portrait, and the audience is watching. They're judging, they're deciding who is strong, and who has lost control. Machiavelli knew this. He saw the world as a grand stage. And on this stage, the one who sets the scene isn't the one who speaks the loudest. It's the one who seems to have emotional control of the situation. Consider a simple situation, a conversation circle. Everyone is talking, laughing, exchanging ideas. Someone shares something important, and another interrupts with a mocking remark. Oh, there he goes with another one of those world-changing stories. Laughter, social relief. The group enjoys themselves. The target smiles, tries to explain, but something has already been lost. It wasn't just the interrupted speech, it was the social standing. The image of someone who was building something was recast as someone who takes themselves too seriously, and the damage was done. Machiavelli would warn, this type of attack doesn't seek truth. It seeks power, and it can only be countered with something few master: control of the environment. Most react to the aggressor. The Machiavellian acts on the audience. He knows he's not in a dialogue, he's in a presentation. And like any presentation, what matters isn't what happens, but how it's perceived. The first step then is not to respond, it's to diffuse the situation. And how do you do that? By breaking the emotional expectations of the moment. When everyone expects an embarrassed laugh, you remain silent. When they expect you to rush to defend yourself, you stare, unhurried, without tension. A silence that isn't empty. It's a choice. It's as if to say, I'm seeing everything, I'm absorbing it, but not in your time, in mine. This pause changes the energy of the scene. It's as if the ground is slowly shifting beneath the other's feet. The audience was expecting a dance. You stood still, and now everyone wonders what will happen. The attacker, once confident, begins to lose his rhythm. His smile grows fainter. His strength lay in the predictability of your reaction. When it doesn't come, he loses it. Machiavelli would call this narrative rupture, the art of breaking out of the expected social script. Because everyone is programmed to play the same game. One attacks, another reacts. The audience chooses a side. But the Machiavellian plays a different game. He doesn't engage in combat. He shifts the stage, repositions the focus, and slowly, he transforms the narrative of humiliation into a suspenseful one where he is not the victim, but the point of mystery. This is exactly what happened to a man named Victor, who worked at a large company. During an important meeting in front of dozens of colleagues, a superior made a cruel comment. Let's see if Victor can deliver something useful this time, shall we? The laughter was collective. Eyes met. Everyone's instinct was to retort, to object, to justify themselves. But Victor merely raised his eyes, looked firmly at the author of the sentence, and with a slight nod, nodded silently. There was no anger. There was no defensiveness. Just a solid presence that didn't waver. The mood changed immediately. His silence screamed louder than any response. After the meeting, it wasn't him who felt bad. It was the one who said too much. In the days that followed, the comment became a source of discomfort among his own colleagues. Victor, on the other hand, emerged stronger, more respected. And all this because he refused the role they tried to give him. That's the secret. Humiliation is a play. And every public attack comes with ready-made roles. The aggressor, the target, the laughs. But when you refuse your role, the script falls apart. Machiavelli knew that power lies not in the reaction, but in defining the frame. When you break the emotional flow of the scene, the focus shifts from what was said to what was left unsaid, and this silence becomes interpretable. It generates tension. It invites doubt, and doubt in this kind of game is fatal because it displaces judgment. The audience begins to wonder, why was he so calm? Why didn't he react? What does he know? Is he planning something? Does he feel superior? This unease, fueled by the lack of response, transforms the scene into something bigger. You're no longer just defending yourself. You're subtly dominating. And the key is this: transforming the exposure into suspense. Let the discomfort migrate to the other side, because no one expects you to be at peace when attacked. Peace is what scares the most. Peace in this context is psychological violence. Machiavelli would call this inverted theater. The audience starts laughing, but ends up restless, starts amused, and ends up respectful. And not because you won an argument, but because you didn't play the game. You imposed another one. This requires practice, coolness, and above all, self-control. Because the impulse to react is human, but mastery is strategic. It's what separates the common from the powerful. And those who master this mastery become dangerous without having to raise their voice. Another story. Gabriella, a university professor, was ridiculed by a student during a presentation. He blurted out, "Wow, it looks like the professor got that from Wikipedia." The class laughed, but she didn't blush, she didn't argue back. She simply walked to her desk, picked up a thick book, turned to the exact page of the theory being explained, pointed it out without saying anything, looked at the student, smiled lightly, and continued the class as if nothing had happened. It was a massacre, but without noise, without scandal, without a fight. Her silence dismantled the attack, because silence in this case wasn't absence, it was direction, and that direction came loaded with authority. The lesson is clear. It's not the one who speaks the most who sets the tone. It's the one who shapes the reaction. Machiavelli would understand this as controlling the frame, the mastery of the framework that defines how actions are perceived. He knew that often it's not the gesture that matters, but the atmosphere surrounding it. And this atmosphere is created by those who command the energy of the moment. Have you ever noticed how some leaders, even without saying anything, can silence a room? How some people walk into a space and suddenly everything changes? It's not charisma, it's density, it's quiet energy, it's the absence of desperation. And that's what transforms ordinary people into commanding presences. Humiliation, when faced with this attitude, loses its breath, because it relies on chaos, on drama, on visible emotion. When you surrender calm, you remove fuel from the fire. And what's more, you turn the aggressor into a loudmouth in front of someone who doesn't move. And what is more feared than someone who doesn't flinch? The human mind doesn't deal well with the unpredictable. When you don't react as expected, you become unpredictable. And the unpredictable is always seen as more powerful than the noisy. Machiavelli didn't want you to be loved. He wanted you to be respected. And respect is born when others understand they don't know how to unsettle you. When they realize their emotional game isn't working with you. When they start treading more carefully around you. And that's real mastery. But there's a deeper level. Because controlling your own reaction is just the beginning. The next stage, and the most Machiavellian, is when you begin to control the entire environment with minimal gestures. A look, a silence, a phrase, a posture. Everything becomes calculated, not as a response, but as direction. You don't react, you choreograph. And that's where the real reversal begins. Public humiliation is no longer a threat. It's an opportunity. Every attack becomes a stage. Every attempt at exposure becomes narrative fodder. You become not just someone who resisted, but someone who used the very scene against those who created it. And when that happens, respect turns to silence, silence turns to fear, and fear turns to reverence. This is the foundation of the entire psychological construction of power taught by Machiavelli. Don't win through noise, win through absence. Don't dominate through force. Dominate through the way others behave toward you. Not through fear of punishment, but through uncertainty. Because nothing paralyzes more than not knowing what the other person will do. And when no one can predict your reaction, everyone starts walking slower, speaking more carefully, observing more closely. In that moment, you've become the center. Not the center of attack, the center of gravity. And what comes next is no longer survival. It's silent domain architecture. It is the creation of a new kind of power, one that begins where the ego ends. And the next stage is the most subtle. It's where you stop resisting the attack and start transforming it into a reflection of the other. And this, Machiavelli knew, is where true fear begins to arise in the eyes of those who once laughed out loud. When someone attacks you in public, what's really being tested? Your strength? Your intelligence? No. What's being tested is your frame, the way you define and maintain your reality in the eyes of others. Most people don't understand this. They react by trying to correct what was said, clear their name, justify themselves. But Machiavelli would teach, those who rush to explain themselves have already lost the game, because the rush to react shows that the other person's narrative has had an effect. It shows that you've accepted their starting point. Machiavellian strategy begins before the response. It begins with the refusal to play the game on the enemy's terms. And this is rare, because it requires coolness, it requires presence, it requires a psychological clarity that most don't achieve. But when it does, the effect is transformative. Public humiliation ceases to be an attack. It becomes a field of exposure, but not yours, the other person's. Because, contrary to what it may seem, every attempt at social attack is a disguised confession. Those who try to bring you down in front of everyone are revealing more about themselves than about you. And if you react not with anger, but with lucidity, something changes. The focus shifts. The room changes. What was an attack becomes a mirror. The aggressor, once dominant, now needs to explain himself. He begins to seem fragile. He begins to seem needy. And the most interesting thing, he really is. Because the desire to expose someone stems from a deep-seated impulse of inferiority. No one in a secure position needs to humiliate another to feel important. Have you ever stopped to wonder why some people always look for a target to belittle? Why are certain comments delivered with a smile, but still have the bitter taste of competition? There's something much deeper going on in these moments than just a mean joke. There's a desperate attempt to climb the ladder by stepping on someone else. And the Machiavellian sees this clearly. He doesn't react to the content. He examines the need. And when he speaks, if he does speak, he doesn't say much. A single sentence loaded with meaning. Something like, "It's curious how much this seems to bother you." Or, "You prepared a lot for this, didn't you?" And then, silence. It's not an answer. It's a revelation. Because now the audience sees what was hidden. The other person's insecurity, the effort to appear superior, the poorly disguised performance. The truth is, most humiliations are rehearsed. They've been said beforehand, shared with others, expected. The abuser believes he's found your weak spot, and he prepares to exploit it. He rehearses the moment as if it were a spectacle. And indeed, it is. But you don't have to go on stage with him. You can turn the audience. You can change the lighting. You can turn his monologue into an involuntary exposure. Have you ever thought about what happens when someone tries to attack you, and you just watch? No rush, no fear, no need to win right there in front of everyone, because you know that attempt is in fact a request for validation, a request for relevance, and you decide not to give in. This is the most subtle and most destructive move, the denial of the reaction, the denial of the script. Because every performance of humiliation needs something to sustain it, your response. Without it, the aggressor loses his breath. He's suspended. And then, what was supposed to be an attack becomes a self-declaration of fragility. The audience feels it, intuits it, perceives the emptiness behind the gesture. Machiavelli would call this a symbolic inversion. The moment that was supposed to define you becomes the moment that reveals the other. And you, motionless, silent, become the figure of reference. Not because you spoke more, but because you resisted the plot, because you demonstrated that their game doesn't apply to you. A woman named Camilla experienced this intensely. During a job interview for a leadership position, the interviewer made a condescending comment. "Don't you think this is all too ambitious for someone with your profile?" Many would have tried to justify, soften, and convince. But Camilla simply tilted her head slightly, looked him in the eye, and said, "It's interesting that you think so. Nothing more." The man expected justifications. He expected insecurity. He received a mirror. The climate changed. Respect was born not from explanation, but from its absence. Because in the world of power, those who don't need to explain, command. And this is one of the most ignored psychological laws. To justify is to admit the other's control over your narrative. Why do we feel such a need to prove ourselves? Why do we so desperately want to clean up our image when it's attacked? because we've been conditioned to believe that respect is something earned through persuasion. Machiavelli disagreed. He saw respect as a consequence of the fear of instability, and nothing is more unstable than someone who doesn't play the game. When you show that you're not reacting on the same level, you elevate yourself. The audience doesn't understand right away, but they feel it. And this feeling of displacement is powerful, because it transforms the aggressor into an object of analysis, and you into a fixed point, a reference, a solid foundation. And in that moment, the tables turned, but it turned in silence. Imagine someone saying something offensive about you, and instead of responding, you just say, "Do you say that often?" This sentence doesn't defend. It doesn't counter. It just illuminates. And in this kind of light, the other person starts to sweat, because they've been pulled out of their performance. They've been brought back to reality. Machiavelli was a master at this. He understood that human beings are, above all, creatures of performance, and that whoever consciously interrupts the performance dominates the situation, because they force the other person to deviate from the script. And outside of the script, the aggressor loses power. They lose focus. They lose audience. Have you ever thought about what your life would be like if you stopped defending yourself all the time? If you used silence as a strategy, pauses as a weapon, and stares as a deflection of energy? Have you ever imagined the impact this would have on a meeting, a debate, a difficult conversation? You don't have to be the smartest. You have to be the most centered, the most unflappable, because whoever remains centered during the chaos sets the pace, and whoever sets the pace defines the outcome. One last image. You're in a crowded room. Someone utters a venomous phrase. Everyone looks at you. They wait for your reaction. You smile slightly and say, "That revealed much more about you than it did about me." And after that, silence. No one expected it, because you didn't deny it. You didn't defend yourself. You simply showed that you saw. Machiavelli would say, this is true command, the mastery of perception, the complete reversal of the narrative, where the silent victim becomes the center of the scene, and the noisy accuser becomes part of the scenery. And if all this seems too subtle, wait until you see what happens when you start using it consistently, when your every sentence becomes a mirror, when every attack becomes fodder for a slow, silent reversal. It's at this point that fear begins to emerge in the eyes of others, because they realize you didn't just survive the humiliation. You've learned to shape their fear with your calm. No one expects you to turn your weakness into a throne. The world has been trained to hunt flaws, not to revere them. But this is the greatest inversion that Niccolo Machiavelli proposes when examining the game of public exposure. When flaw becomes a sword, the enemy hesitates, because he no longer knows where to strike. Traditional logic teaches you to hide your imperfections. Maintain a pose. Pretend you're always right, always strong, always invulnerable. But this builds a prison made of facade, and every facade sooner or later cracks. That's why the hardest falls always come from those who seem too perfect, because the higher the mask, the more brutal the fall when it falls. The Machiavellian sees this coldly. He doesn't pretend he's without flaws. He chooses which flaws to show and when. He controls the timing, and most importantly, he controls the tone. He reveals what others would try to hide, and in doing so, he kills the hunger for attack before it even grows. Have you ever tried to hit someone who doesn't hide what you want to expose? The blow loses force. The embarrassment disappears, and now you seem like the only one insisting on something that's already settled. This is the art of anticipating humiliation, of narrating your own weakness so clearly, so coldly, so confidently, that it ceases to be a weakness and becomes a mark. An example of this was the speech of a French politician who, about to be accused of adultery, took the pulpit and said, "Before you say, yes, I was wrong, I cheated, and yet I returned home, faced my family, faced who I am. Judge me for that if you will, but at least don't lie to yourselves like I did." The audience's response was the opposite of what was expected. There was silence, and then applause, not because he was admirable, but because no one else could touch him with that. He had anticipated it. He had controlled the impact. The confession, which in any other tone would have been defeat, became a weapon of narrative control. And why does this happen? Because there's an invisible mechanism at work in every social game: emotional surprise. When the audience has seen everything, they expect the familiar script. They expect denial, excuses, justifications. When instead they receive a raw, direct, and steady delivery, the cycle is broken. The emotional rhythm collapses. And amidst the rubble, the one who spoke last is no longer the accuser. It's you. Social psychology research shows that the impact of a confession is largely shaped by tone and body posture at the time of delivery. When someone admits something with visible guilt, judgment increases. But when the same confession is made soberly, with a firm gaze, and without any attempt to please, the effect changes. The observer feels respect. Because human beings deep down don't seek perfection, they seek coherence. And coherence between words and posture builds trust, even if the words carry flaws. Machiavelli would have explored this with surgical precision. He would have understood that admitting a flaw isn't the problem. The problem is when the flaw controls you. But if you master the stage of your exposure, if you guide others' perspectives on your pain, you become not the ashamed one, but the curator of that narrative. You are the one who delivers the thorn, and that changes everything. Imagine a workplace where someone is ridiculed for having been fired in the past. Instead of denying it, the person calmly says, "Yes, I was fired. I lost my way. I lost my rhythm. And it was in that hole that I learned to build what I have today." What did the group expect? Shame. What did they get? Direction. The weakness wasn't avoided. It was managed. It was used as a bridge. And now, whoever tried to attack seems petty, childish, almost out of touch. This applies to any flaw, a physical scar, a past failure, an old insecurity. Everything can be absorbed into your narrative if you put it into your voice. The secret isn't to appear perfect, it's to appear whole. And wholeness comes when you embrace even that which could bring you down and deliberately bring it to the table. How many times have you kept quiet for fear someone would use it against you? How many times have you avoided telling a story because you thought it diminished your worth? What if instead it was the key to your authority? What if instead of hiding it, you told it so coolly that no one could ever use it against you again? Machiavelli would have no patience for modern image-based self-protection. He saw the world as a field where the strongest were not those who hid best, but those who exposed most intelligently. And emotional intelligence, in this case, is knowing when the pain has been absorbed enough to be shared without trembling, without guilt, without the desire to be forgiven. This is the greatest armor, not the absence of flaws, but the familiarity with them, the ability to look them in the eye and say, "You taught me." Because when someone tries to humiliate you with something you already understand, already name, already embrace, the impact is null. The scene loses meaning. The room is empty of tension. The enemy feels lost. There's a curious phenomenon in group psychology. When a member publicly admits something considered shameful and does so calmly, others tend to flock to him, not because of the failure itself, but because of the courage to sustain it. This is the effect of emotional authority, an authority that comes not from always winning, but from remaining whole even after losing. This is the kind of leadership that isn't taught in manuals. It comes from well-executed exposition. And Machiavelli, if he were alive today, wouldn't be writing about personal marketing. He'd be writing about the art of guiding others' perspectives. And that inevitably involves knowing which part of you is ready to be revealed, and how. Think of someone who has experienced financial failure. It can be devastating. But now imagine that person saying in front of a group, "I lost everything, and I learned that haste was my true debt." This kind of speech doesn't generate pity, it generates respect. Because it has structure, it has depth, and most importantly, it has command. You don't need a clean record, you need a well-told story. And every good story has pain, loss, and contradiction. But what matters is the narrator. They're the one who controls the timeline. And when that narrator is you regain not only external respect but also internal control. No one can humiliate you with what you've already transformed into a tool. That's the whole point. If something still shames you, disturbs you, holds you back, it's because you haven't integrated it yet. You're still trying to hide it. And everything that's hidden rots. But everything that's firmly revealed matures and becomes part of your presence. That's why some of the world's most respected leaders were those who made mistakes publicly. And they didn't deny it. They didn't play the victim. They simply accepted it, and they rebuilt. This rebuilding is what cements respect, because it shows that the fall wasn't the end. It was the foundation. The social impact of someone who doesn't fear exposing their flaws is incalculable, because it breaks the main control mechanism of most social attacks, fear. And when you no longer fear being seen in your entirety, you become a threat, not because he's perfect, but because he's untouchable, because he has nothing to hide. And those who have nothing to hide cannot be controlled by shame. This is Machiavellian freedom. Not the freedom to do whatever you want, but the freedom not to be shaped by the gaze of others, to be the gaze itself, to not worry about the perfection of the image, but about the solidity of the presence. And if you still carry something you fear will be discovered, maybe it's time to turn it into a tool, a foundation, a part of your story, because as long as you hide it, you'll always be vulnerable. But the day you bring this to light, in your tone, in your time, with your voice, you will see that there is no blow more powerful than the one you disarm before it is even thrown. And whoever tried to humiliate you will find themselves facing someone who didn't protect themselves, prepared themselves, and whoever prepares with truth cannot be defeated. This is the beginning of elevation, but it only begins when you stop running away from yourself. The most silent form of attack is oblivion, not real oblivion, but staged oblivion, strategic absence, the gaze that passes through you as if you weren't there, the interruption disguised as haste, the invitation that never arrives, the silence after you speak. This kind of humiliation is so subtle that many don't even notice it, but it exists, and it corrodes, because silent exclusion doesn't need witnesses, it only needs you. And this you gradually feels erased, as if the world began to function perfectly well without your presence. This is the subtlest and most dangerous pain, the feeling of irrelevance. This is how modern attacks operate, almost never with aggressive words, but with small, calculated, socially acceptable gestures, and therefore impossible to confront. Because how do you respond to absence? How do you accuse emptiness? How do you show that the attack was an omission? Silence may seem civilized, but it is often just the most polite form of emotional destruction, and it acts silently, slowly, like social erosion. Machiavelli would have looked at this coldly. He would have understood that the most effective power is that which doesn't seem like power. Real control isn't in shouting orders, but in manipulating the flow of attention. And when someone takes the focus off you, when they deliberately erase you from the center of social attention, they're not just ignoring you, they're weakening you. They're telling you without words that your presence is optional, that your speech is disposable, that your existence is merely background noise. Because attention is status, presence is value, and in social theater, those who are ignored lose the script. They lose the scene, they lose their place. Subtle exclusion works like this. It isolates you without walls, pushes you away without touch, diminishes you without words. And if you don't understand what's happening, you start to blame yourself. You start to doubt your own relevance. You start to hide more. And worst of all, you start to make concessions. You start to change your tone. You start to apologize for existing. But the Machiavellian never does this. He never begs to be seen. He never asks to return to the light. When excluded, he doesn't despair. He reorganizes. He diverts the flow. He understands that if attention has been withdrawn, then it must be redirected, not by shouting but by building. He doesn't chase after whoever extinguished him. He creates another spotlight and positions himself there. He doesn't try to fix the rejection. He turns it into fuel. This is what few understand. Exclusion is not the end, it's redirection, a hidden invitation for you to create a new field of influence. And this is done through 3 silent movements. First, you disconnect. You stop seeking from the aggressor the recognition they've already decided to deny. Second, you reinvest. You begin to direct your presence to another part of the environment, another person, another space. And third, you reorganize. You begin to generate value where you weren't expected to stand out. And when that value begins to shine, even the eyes that previously ignored you turn to understand what's happening. That's exactly what happened to Mariana. She had been invited to a dinner with co-workers, all men. During the conversation, every time she spoke, she was interrupted. Every time she suggested something, she was ignored, until she stopped insisting. Silently, she turned her attention to the wife of one of the attendees who was on the edge of the group. They began a deep conversation. They laughed. They connected. Within minutes, others began paying attention to them. The energy shifted. The dynamic broke. What was invisible became the epicenter, and the eyes returned, no longer out of charity, but out of curiosity, because something was happening there, something genuine, something magnetic. She didn't confront the group. She didn't beg to be heard. She simply redirected, and with that, she created gravity where there was none. And that's the key. When you create presence in a new place, the old feels threatened. Because what tried to exclude you now watches you ascend in another space. And the discomfort shifts, the hierarchy changes, and the game begins to turn around. How many times have you tried to prove yourself to someone who had already decided to ignore you? How many times have you tried to gain attention in a space that already labeled you as expendable? What if the solution isn't to persist, but to leave the scene and light another one? What if your strength lies precisely in what you create outside the battlefield that rejected you? Machiavelli would teach that to insist is to submit, but to reposition oneself is to dominate. Because true power doesn't need to be central. It needs to be gravitational. It needs to attract. It needs to be missed. And when you withdraw quietly, without drama, but with clarity, you generate absence. And absence, when felt, transforms into power, because there is no greater recognition of your worth than the uneasy silence that arises when you leave the room. The modern world doesn't prepare people to deal with non-recognition. Everything revolves around being seen, being heard, being validated, and whoever controls this flow controls other people's self-esteem. That's why silent exclusion is so destructive, because it triggers deep insecurities. It makes people feel like they don't exist. And when this feeling sets in, defenses drop, dignity falters, and concessions become a silent habit. But the Machiavellian refuses to give this power to another. He anchors himself. He observes. He understands that not being seen doesn't mean being worthless. It means there's a new game to be created. And he creates. Because presence isn't a gift, it's a construction. And those who know how to build never depend on the attention of others. They create their own. And they do so with strategic intelligence, with emotional coolness, with art. In a study conducted by sociologists at Columbia University, it was observed that in social groups, ignored members often became more influential when they stopped trying to belong and created new dynamics of connection. Respect in these cases didn't come from reintegration. It came from autonomy, from strategic displacement, and from the quiet value generated on the fringes of the group. Because value doesn't need to be loud, it just needs to become indispensable. This is the forgotten lesson in the world of appearances. You don't need to be at the center to have power. You need to be where the value is being created. And that value doesn't need applause. It needs consistency. It needs direction. It needs repetition. And when you master this, even the center begins to shift toward you. When someone excludes you, try this. Don't react. Don't change your tone. Just shift your focus. See who else is there. See where the flow is weakest. And then, step in with presence, with clarity, with purpose, and see the effect. See the field reorganize. See the attention shift. See the invisible become inevitable. The Machiavellian doesn't force space. He makes his space inevitable. And this isn't done with words, it's done frequently. With posture, with silence that refuses to beg, with energy that doesn't submit. Because energy doesn't lie, it simply shifts the center of gravity. And gravity attracts. Have you ever noticed how the ones who command the most respect aren't the loudest? They're the most stable. The ones who don't chase. The ones who don't try to correct perception, but who slowly shape the energy around them. They don't need to prove anything, because they've already become proof of something. And exclusion, when used consciously, becomes a springboard, because it forces you to look outside the cycle where you were no longer valued. It pushes you toward a broader vision. And when you act with presence in the new space, the old one begins to perceive you differently. It begins to wonder where you learned to stand firm. And the answer lies in the silence you chose, in the redirection you created, in the absence you transformed into presence. This is the most elegant turnaround, when those who erased you begin to seek your shine, when those who ignored you try to understand why they now feel you, and they no longer know how to contain you. Because you no longer want to return to the old space. You created your own, and that no one can take away. But be careful. This transition cannot be made in anger. It cannot be done as revenge. It must be done with direction, with maturity, with intention, because revenge is all too visible, and the most lasting power is always the one that acts invisibly. Machiavelli believed that true dominion is that which does not appear to be domination. That true power is that which does not need to be announced, and that is why the Machiavellian, faced with exclusion, does not go to war. He changes the game. He changes the rules. He changes the map. And whoever changes the map redefines the territory. And whoever redefines the territory writes the new history. And whoever changes the game changes everything. So the next time you're ignored, don't correct yourself. Don't explain yourself. Don't beg. Take your energy and take it elsewhere. With intelligence, with poise, with presence, with reinvention. Because when you do this, you teach everyone around you something, that your value isn't in the attention they give you. It's in the attention you choose to give it. And that is absolute power. Because what no one can give you, no one can take away from you. Most people live in a constant struggle to appear unshakable, when inside, they are consumed by doubts, insecurities, and memories of moments when they were diminished, ridiculed, or ignored. They behave like fortresses, but inside they are fragile labyrinths of unresolved stories. Every ignored comment, every uncomfortable silence, every glance that never came, accumulates like dust in the corner of the mind, until identity begins to shape itself around absence, not presence. It is in these moments, silent and invisible to others, that the almost desperate desire to become untouchable is born. Not out of vanity, but for protection, out of a need for survival. But the mistake, the most common and most tragic mistake, is believing that this invulnerable state will come from outside, that it will be achieved when the world finally recognizes us, validates us, applauds us. Niccolo Machiavelli would never trust something so fragile. For him, true power arises when external recognition becomes irrelevant, when you stop trying to control the eyes of others, and finally begin to control your own center of gravity. This requires a rupture. It requires breaking with the idea that you need approval to exist, and begin to exist as a cause, not a consequence. But what does this mean in practice? It means you need to stop being a reaction and become a presence. It means your energy can no longer depend on what people do to you, but on what you decide to represent. No longer respond to exclusion, humiliation, or contempt with disorganized emotion, but with a strategic stance that doesn't depend on the moment, but transcends it. Machiavelli taught that power lies with those who set the pace, not with those who respond to it. And this truth, though uncomfortable, is liberating. You will only be respected when you stop seeking respect. Because respect, when it's genuine, isn't sought. It's inevitable. That's why the time has come to transform this philosophy into real action. Philosophy, however profound, is useless without practical embodiment. The first step is simple, yet profound. Stop trying to fix how others see you. This is the most common prison, the incessant effort to explain, justify, and defend yourself. A lifetime spent trying to appear better in the eyes of those who have already decided not to see you. The Machiavellian doesn't explain. He constructs, silently, with intention, with clarity. He knows that no defense is more powerful than the absence of defense, because what is unshakable doesn't need to be justified. In every situation where you're provoked, ridiculed, or erased, you'll apply 3 principles: pause, reorientation, and construction. Pausing breaks the script you're expected to follow. It interrupts the automatic cycle of humiliation and reaction. Reorientation shifts your energy to a new point of attention, where your presence can flourish without needing approval. And construction builds value where there was previously absence. It transforms emptiness into fertile soil. And that takes courage, because emptiness scares. Let's put this into practice. For 7 days, you will observe your posture in any social interaction where tension, rejection, or exclusion arises. Instead of reacting with anxiety, you will mentally note 3 things. 1. What provoked the feeling of exclusion. 2. What your instinctive reaction would be. 3. How you can reverse the flow of this interaction using Machiavellian principles. This exercise will show you that you have more control than you think, and that most of your power lies in choosing what not to do. These situations can happen at work, at school, with your family, or on social media. They always arise. They're inevitable. And that's where you'll practice. Because emotional mastery isn't achieved theoretically, it's shaped by the friction of reality. True respect isn't given, it's felt. And it's felt especially when you resist the urge to react. Second, you will choose a space in your life where your presence is still muted, an environment where you feel voiceless, where your energy is unnoticed, or where you tend to withdraw. And there, you will not ask for space. You will create value. You will begin to speak less and observe more. You will identify where there is fragility, need, or disconnection, and there you will plant your presence with simple but consistent actions, like someone sowing in soil that others have ignored. How? By joining a conversation with a pointed comment that changes the tone, by offering an unexpected solution to a problem others have ignored, by reinforcing active listening when no one is paying attention, by bringing calm when everyone is rushing. Machiavelli would say that a true player influences the game without moving much. Their silence carries more weight than the words of others. Their presence, even discreet, reorients the room. Because where there is solid energy, there is direction. And where there is direction, there is power. Third step, you will develop your value language. This means reviewing how you communicate, not to be more accepted, but to be more impactful. Stop over-softening your opinion to avoid conflict. Stop agreeing just to maintain harmony. Instead, learn to use pauses, short sentences, and intentional tones of voice. Authority often lies in the way something is said, more than the content itself. It's not about talking a lot. It's about saying something that resonates, that lasts, that transforms. Have you ever noticed how some people say little but everyone listens? This is mastery of verbal energy. It's knowing that language serves purpose, not anxiety. It's transforming every word into a blade, every silence into presence. It's speaking as someone already complete, and not as someone begging for connection. And last but not least, develop your resistance to judgment. Fear of being looked at is what imprisons most people. Shame is the invisible poison that paralyzes bold moves. So accept it. You will be misunderstood, you will be judged, and sometimes you will be hated. But this is part of the alchemy of respect. Because paradoxically, it is when you endure being misunderstood that you begin to be deeply respected. The price of respect is temporary solitude. And Machiavelli knew this. Machiavelli was hated, persecuted, and called immoral. But today he is read, studied, and revered. Because he understood something few accept. Time validates steadfastness. It's not immediate applause that matters, but the lasting impression. And you only leave that impression when you have the courage to be unpopular, as long as it serves a greater purpose. Time rewards those who refuse to bow down. Don't try to win the acceptance game. Redefine the game, rewrite the rules, create your own field. Be the architect of your own narrative. True presence doesn't seek an audience. It creates a stage. Now, take a deep breath. Reread everything you've learned so far. Visualize the scenes in which you were humiliated. Imagine how you would react today. With calm, with presence, with direction. This isn't just theory, it's psychological training. And every time you apply it, something in you changes. Something strengthens. Something aligns with your most powerful self. And if this touched you in any way, if it awakened something within you, don't let that feeling die. Turn it into action. Share this video with someone who needs it. Like the video. Subscribe to the Deep Psyche channel to continue receiving content like this. And if you'd like, leave a comment below, it can be anonymous, telling about your experiences, challenges, or victories on this path to becoming untouchable. Because here, in this space, we're building something rare. A silent army of people who don't live to please, but to master their own rhythms. And if you've made it this far, you're already part of it. And the world doesn't know it yet, but it's about to feel it.